In the summer of 1998, the salmon run along Alaska's Kodiak Island drew fishermen from across the state, eager to cast their lines into the teeming rivers. Among them were three friends: Rick, a seasoned angler with a penchant for risk; Michael, a cautious and methodical outdoorsman; and Danny, the youngest and least experienced of the group, eager to prove himself. The trio had rented a small cabin on the edge of a river, known for its salmon-rich waters and its proximity to grizzly bear territory. The first 2 days of their trip were uneventful but fruitful. The men caught dozens of fish, their coolers quickly filling with silver-scaled prizes. They celebrated their success each evening with grilled salmon over a campfire, sharing laughter and plans for the next day's expedition. The occasional bear sightings along the riverbanks added a thrill to their adventure, but they adhered to safety protocols, keeping their distance and storing food securely. On the third day, the trio ventured further upriver, drawn by the promise of untouched fishing spots. The river widened here, its crystal-clear waters rushing over smooth stones. The air was alive with the scent of pine and the constant splash of salmon leaping upstream. The men set up on a gravel bar, casting their lines and waiting for the familiar tug of a fish on the hook. As the morning passed, Rick's attention drifted to the opposite bank. There, a massive grizzly bear stood in the shallows, its powerful paws swiping through the water with practiced precision. Within moments, it caught a large salmon, its jaws clamping down on the wriggling fish. The bear lumbered onto the bank, dropping its catch and tearing into the flesh with a guttural growl. Rick's eyes lit up with a mix of awe and temptation. The bear's salmon was the largest he'd seen all trip, its bright red flesh a stark contrast to the gray stones. Against Michael's and Danny's protests, Rick hatched a reckless plan. He wanted the bear's salmon, convinced it would be the ultimate trophy of their trip. Ignoring the inherent danger, he waded across the river, his movements deliberate but hasty. The bear noticed him immediately. It paused mid-bite, lifting its massive head and fixing Rick with a piercing gaze. The growl that followed was low and menacing, a clear warning. But Rick pressed on, his hand reaching for the fish. As soon as he touched the salmon, the bear roared and charged, its powerful body moving with terrifying speed. Rick stumbled backward, dropping the fish as he scrambled to retreat. The bear's first swipe caught his leg, the claws slicing through his waders and leaving deep gashes. Rick cried out, falling into the shallow water. Michael and Danny, watching from the opposite bank, froze in horror. The bear loomed over Rick, its growls echoing through the valley. Michael reacted first. He grabbed a flare gun from his pack and fired it into the air, the sharp crack momentarily startling the bear. It turned its head toward the sound, giving Rick a chance to crawl toward the riverbank. Danny rushed to help, waving his arms and shouting to distract the animal. The bear hesitated, its focus shifting between the men, before it roared again and swiped at the ground in frustration. The men managed to pull Rick across the river, his leg bleeding profusely. They retreated to their fishing spot, their breaths ragged as they assessed his injuries. The gashes were deep but not life-threatening, though Rick's mobility was severely compromised. The bear, meanwhile, had returned to its salmon, its growls quieter but no less menacing. The group faced a grim decision. Their truck was several miles downstream, and Rick's injury made the trek perilous. They fashioned a makeshift stretcher using fishing rods and jackets, tying them together with paracord. Danny and Michael took turns carrying Rick, their progress slow and arduous. The bear's presence remained an oppressive shadow. It followed them at a distance, its massive frame visible through the trees. The men's adrenaline kept them moving, but every crack of a branch or rustle of leaves sent their hearts racing. The river, once a source of tranquility, now felt like a barrier between them and safety. As evening fell, the group's progress slowed further. Rick's pain had worsened, and the makeshift stretcher strained under his weight. Michael suggested setting up camp for the night, a risky proposition given the bear's proximity. They found a small clearing near the riverbank and built a fire, the flickering flames their only comfort against the encroaching darkness. The bear reappeared shortly after dusk. It circled the clearing, its growls low and continuous. Michael and Danny used every trick they knew to keep it at bay, from banging metal pots to tossing rocks in its direction. The bear remained just outside the firelight, its eyes glowing in the dark. The tension was suffocating, each moment stretching into an eternity. At dawn, the men resumed their journey. Exhausted and terrified, they pushed forward, the river guiding their way. The bear followed for a while longer before disappearing into the forest, its growls fading into the distance. The group reached their truck by midday, collapsing in relief as they loaded Rick into the back seat. At the nearest town, Rick received medical treatment for his injuries. The experience left him shaken and remorseful, his recklessness having nearly cost him his life. The group's story spread quickly, becoming a cautionary tale among the local fishing community. The bear attack served as a stark reminder of nature's power and the consequences of underestimating its inhabitants. Rick, though scarred, returned to the outdoors with a newfound respect for wildlife. Michael and Danny, despite their fear, took pride in their quick thinking and teamwork. The salmon theft became an infamous anecdote, a story of survival that underscored the fine line between adventure and danger in the wild. For years to come, the men would recount their harrowing encounter, their voices tinged with both awe and humility. The grizzly bear, a symbol of untamed nature, remained a powerful presence in their memories, a reminder of the risks and rewards of venturing into the wilderness. In the summer of 1973, a Boy Scout troop ventured into the Adirondack Mountains of upstate New York for a week-long camping trip. The troop consisted of 12 boys aged between 12 and 16, led by Scoutmaster Gerald Higgins and 2 assistant leaders, Tim Mathers and Carl Dwyer. The trip was meant to teach wilderness survival skills, foster teamwork, and instill a respect for nature. The group set up camp on the shores of Blackwater Lake, a remote and serene location surrounded by towering pines and rocky outcroppings. The boys spent their days hiking, fishing, and practicing fire building, their laughter and energy filling the quiet forest. Gerald ensured that the troop adhered to strict safety protocols, especially given the area's reputation for black bear sightings. Food was stored in bear-proof containers and hung high in trees, and the boys were instructed never to wander alone. By the 4th night, the troop had settled into a comfortable rhythm. After a hearty dinner of fresh fish and beans, they gathered around the campfire for stories and marshmallows. The fire crackled brightly, casting flickering shadows on the surrounding trees. As the night wore on, the boys retired to their tents, the forest soon filled with the sounds of rustling leaves and distant owl calls. In the early hours of the morning, a disturbance shattered the camp's tranquility. The sound of heavy footsteps and the clattering of metal woke Gerald. He stepped out of his tent and froze at the sight before him. A large black bear was pawing at one of the food containers, its immense strength denting the metal. The bear's movements were deliberate, its growls low and guttural. Gerald acted quickly, grabbing a flashlight and banging a pot to scare the bear. The noise woke the boys, who peeked out of their tents, their faces pale with fear. Tim and Carl joined Gerald, armed with flashlights and firewood. Together, they made as much noise as possible, hoping to drive the bear away. The bear hesitated, growling and swiping at the container before retreating a few paces. The relief was short-lived, as the bear's hunger overrode its caution. It charged toward the center of the camp. Chaos erupted. The boys scattered, some running to the water's edge while others sought refuge behind trees and rocks. Gerald shouted for everyone to stay together, but the bear's presence was overwhelming. It swiped at a tent, shredding the fabric and sending gear flying. A 14-year-old scout named Billy stumbled as he tried to flee, drawing the bear's attention. Tim grabbed a burning log from the campfire and swung it at the bear, the flames casting wild shadows. The bear turned toward him, growling ferociously. Carl used the distraction to pull Billy to safety, dragging him behind a fallen tree. The bear lunged at Tim, swiping at his arm and knocking him to the ground. Gerald charged with a canister of bear spray, releasing a burst into the bear's face. The bear roared, momentarily disoriented, but remained a threat. The troop regrouped at the lake's edge, their breaths ragged and their fear palpable. Gerald and Carl worked quickly to count the boys, ensuring everyone was accounted for. Tim, though injured, insisted he was fine, his arm bleeding but functional. The bear lingered near the camp, its growls echoing across the water. As dawn approached, the group devised a plan. They decided to leave the campsite and head for a ranger station located several miles away. The boys were divided into pairs, each led by one of the adults. They moved cautiously, sticking to the shoreline where visibility was better. The bear followed at a distance, its massive frame visible through the trees. The journey was grueling. The boys, though frightened, showed remarkable resilience, helping each other navigate the rocky terrain. Gerald and Carl kept a watchful eye on the bear, their bear spray canisters ready. Tim, despite his injury, stayed at the rear, ensuring no one fell behind. The bear's presence was an ever-looming shadow, its occasional growl sending shivers through the group. After several hours, the troop reached the ranger station, a small wooden cabin perched on a hill overlooking the lake. The rangers acted swiftly, tending to Tim's wounds and calming the boys. They dispatched a team to investigate the campsite and assess the bear's behavior. The group's story was documented, their courage and quick thinking commended. The bear was later tracked and relocated to a more remote area of the forest. Wildlife officials determined that its aggression was likely due to hunger and a lack of natural food sources. The incident prompted discussions about human activity in bear habitats and the importance of proper food storage. For the troop, the experience was a sobering reminder of the wilderness's power and unpredictability. Gerald, though shaken, continued to lead trips, his commitment to teaching survival skills unwavering. Tim recovered from his injuries and became an advocate for wildlife safety. The boys, though traumatized, grew stronger from the ordeal, their bond as a troop unbreakable. The bear attack at Blackwater Lake became a story they carried with them, a tale of survival and the fine line between humanity and the wild. For those who lived through it, the memory of that summer night was both a cautionary lesson and a testament to their resilience. In the summer of 2014, a group of hikers embarked on a challenging expedition through the remote wilderness of Wyoming's Wind River Range. The group consisted of 7 individuals: Rachel, an experienced trekker and the group's leader; James, a wildlife enthusiast; Mia, a botanist with a passion for alpine flora; Chris and Dylan, lifelong friends eager for adventure; Ellie, a novice hiker looking for a new challenge; and Peter, a professional photographer documenting the journey. The expedition's goal was to complete a grueling 50-mile loop that traversed rugged peaks, glacial valleys, and pristine alpine lakes. They carried enough provisions for 8 days, each step meant to test their endurance and deepen their connection to the wild. The group was well prepared, with Rachel ensuring everyone understood the risks, including the presence of grizzly bears in the area. The first 3 days were exhilarating. The group ascended rocky trails, crossed icy streams, and camped under star-filled skies. They encountered marmots, elk, and even a distant wolf pack, their calls echoing through the valleys. Each night they followed strict protocols, securing food in bear-proof containers and hanging them from high branches, maintaining a clean camp, and staying vigilant. On the 4th day, the group descended into a lush valley flanked by steep cliffs. A river meandered through the meadow, its banks alive with wildflowers and buzzing insects. The hikers decided to rest here, pitching their tents near the water's edge. While Mia cataloged plants and Peter captured the scenery, Chris and Dylan explored upstream, their laughter carrying on the breeze. As the afternoon sun cast long shadows, the tranquility was shattered by a guttural growl. James, who had wandered a short distance to photograph wildlife, froze as a massive grizzly bear emerged from the underbrush. The bear's fur glistened in the sunlight, its eyes fixed on the startled hiker. James backed away slowly, his heart pounding, but the bear advanced, its movements deliberate and menacing. The group heard the growls and James's shouts and rushed to his aid. Rachel grabbed her bear spray and signaled for everyone to stay calm and together. The bear's presence was overwhelming, its sheer size and power a terrifying reminder of their vulnerability. It growled again, then charged. Rachel fired a burst of bear spray, the orange mist enveloping the animal's face. The bear roared in fury, momentarily retreating but not fleeing. James stumbled as he tried to retreat, his camera forgotten. The bear lunged, swiping at him and knocking him to the ground. Rachel fired another burst, hitting the bear's eyes and nose. The animal roared and turned its attention to the rest of the group. The hikers scattered instinctively, seeking refuge behind rocks and trees. The bear charged at Dylan and Chris, who had been closest. Dylan tripped over a root, and the bear swiped at him, leaving deep gashes on his leg. Chris threw a rock at the bear, hitting its shoulder and momentarily distracting it. Mia and Ellie worked frantically to pull Dylan to safety, while Rachel and Peter tried to keep the bear at bay. The group regrouped near a rocky outcrop, their breaths ragged and their fear palpable. Dylan's injuries were severe, blood soaking through his pants as Mia applied a makeshift tourniquet using a belt. The bear lingered nearby, growling and pacing, its dark eyes fixed on the humans. Rachel kept her bear spray at the ready, knowing they couldn't remain exposed for long. As night fell, the group moved cautiously along the riverbank, using the fading light to guide their way to higher ground. Dylan's injury slowed their progress, and every sound in the forest set their nerves on edge. The bear's occasional growls echoed through the valley, a chilling reminder of its presence. By dawn, the group reached a glacial moraine, its rugged terrain offering a vantage point and some protection. They fortified their position using fallen branches and loose stones, creating a makeshift barrier. Mia and Ellie tended to Dylan, while Rachel and Peter scouted the area for a possible escape route. The bear's tracks were visible in the soft earth, a constant reminder of their peril. The Grizzly reappeared mid-morning, its massive frame silhouetted against the rising sun. It approached cautiously, its growls low and resonant. The group used noise and bear spray to keep it at bay, but its persistence was unrelenting. The hours dragged on, each moment steeped in tension. By early afternoon, Rachel spotted a helicopter in the distance. Using a flare from their emergency kit, she signaled for help. The pilot saw the distress signal and circled above, radioing for a rescue team. The bear, startled by the noise and movement, retreated into the forest, its growls fading into the distance. The rescue team arrived hours later, airlifting Dylan to a nearby hospital. The rest of the group was escorted back to safety, their ordeal finally over. Dylan underwent surgery for his injuries, his recovery slow but steady. The others, though shaken, emerged physically unscathed, but forever changed. The bear attack became a stark reminder of the wilderness's unpredictability and the importance of preparation. Rachel continued leading hikes, her resolve to educate others about safety in bear country stronger than ever. James returned to photography, his lens capturing the delicate balance between beauty and danger. Mia and Ellie became advocates for wildlife conservation, their voices adding to the call for coexistence and respect for nature. The hiker's story spread among outdoor enthusiasts, serving as both a cautionary tale and a testament to resilience. For those who lived it, the memory of that day in the Wind River Range was a defining moment, a reminder of the wilderness's raw power and the strength found in unity and survival. In the autumn of 1935, A remote logging camp deep in the Cascade Mountains of Washington served as home to a small crew of timber workers. The camp, perched near a narrow valley surrounded by dense pine forests, was far from civilization, its isolation broken only by weekly supply deliveries. The team consisted of 10 men, led by foreman Walter Grayson, a grizzled veteran of the trade with decades of experience in the wilderness. The work was grueling but straightforward, felling trees, stripping them of branches, and transporting the logs downriver to a nearby mill. The camp was rugged, with simple wooden cabins, a communal dining hall, and a storage shed for tools and provisions. Bears were an ever-present danger in the region, drawn by the scent of food and the occasional animal carcass left by hunters. Walter's strict rules ensured the men stored food securely and never wandered alone. One crisp morning in late October, the camp stirred to life as the men prepared for another day of work. The air was thick with the smell of sawdust and pine, and the rhythmic sound of axes biting into wood echoed through the valley. By midday, the team had felled several massive trees near the camp's perimeter. Walter directed the younger workers to strip the logs, while he and 2 others ventured into the forest to scout new sections for cutting. The first sign of trouble came in the early afternoon. Edward, a young and eager worker, stumbled upon fresh bear tracks near a stream. The prints were enormous, their depth in the muddy soil suggesting a grizzly of considerable size. Edward reported his discovery to Walter upon his return, but the foreman, while concerned, reassured the men that the camp's precautions would keep them safe. That night, as the men gathered in the dining hall for supper, the usual banter and laughter masked a growing unease. The forest outside was eerily quiet, the usual symphony of nocturnal sounds absent. The men stored the leftovers in a reinforced pantry and double-checked the locks on the tool shed before retiring to their cabins. In the dead of night, a thunderous crash jolted the camp awake. Walter grabbed his rifle and stepped outside, his breath visible in the frigid air. The storage shed door was hanging off its hinges, and the unmistakable silhouette of a massive grizzly bear loomed nearby. The bear had torn through the structure, scattering tools and provisions across the clearing. It growled, its dark eyes glinting in the moonlight. Walter fired a warning shot into the air, the sharp crack echoing through the valley. The bear paused, growling louder, before charging toward the dining hall. The commotion roused the other men, who spilled out of their cabins armed with axes, shovels, and lanterns. The bear's sheer size and aggression were overwhelming. It swiped at the dining hall door, splintering the wood and forcing its way inside. Chaos erupted as the men tried to drive the bear away. Walter fired another shot, this time grazing the animal's shoulder. The bear roared in fury, swiping at a table and sending it crashing into the wall. Edward, caught in the bear's path, was knocked to the ground, his leg badly injured. 2 workers dragged him to safety as others waved lanterns and shouted, attempting to distract the bear. The animal turned its attention to the cabins, tearing into one and scattering the contents. Walter and 2 others flanked it, using torches to push it toward the clearing. The bear, enraged and wounded, charged again, its massive paws kicking up dirt and debris. It swiped at a worker named John, its claws raking his side. John collapsed, blood staining his shirt, but he managed to crawl out of the bear's reach. The men regrouped near the tool shed, their breaths ragged and their faces pale with fear. Walter directed them to form a defensive line, using torches and tools to create a barrier. The bear circled the camp, growling and sniffing the air, its dark form blending with the shadows. The standoff lasted for what felt like hours, the tension thick as the men clung to their makeshift weapons. As dawn approached, the bear finally retreated into the forest, its growls fading into the distance. The camp was in shambles. The dining hall was destroyed, one of the cabins was nearly uninhabitable, and supplies were scattered and ruined. Edward and John's injuries were severe, and both men required immediate medical attention. Walter knew they couldn't remain in the camp with the bear likely to return. The men fashioned a stretcher for Edward, and supported John as they began the grueling trek to the nearest logging outpost, miles away through rough terrain. The journey was slow and arduous, the men's fear of the bear's return ever present. Walter and another worker took turns at the front, their rifles ready, while the others carried the injured and scouted the trail. By midday, they reached the outpost, their exhaustion evident. The outpost's workers provided aid, tending to Edward and John's wounds and contacting a doctor from a nearby town. The men recounted their harrowing experience, their voices heavy with both relief and lingering fear. In the days that followed, wildlife officials tracked the bear and determined that its aggression was likely due to hunger and the encroachment of logging operations on its habitat. The animal was relocated to a more remote area, but the incident underscored the delicate balance between human activity and the natural world. For the men of the logging camp, the attack left a lasting impact. Walter, though hardened by years in the wilderness, began advocating for stricter protocols and greater respect for wildlife. Edward and John, though scarred, eventually recovered and returned to work, their bond with their fellow workers strengthened by the ordeal. The camp was rebuilt, but the memory of the bear attack lingered, a sobering reminder of the risks inherent in taming the wild. The story of the bear attack in the Cascades became a cautionary tale shared among loggers and outdoor enthusiasts, a testament to the raw power of nature and the resilience of those who faced it. For the survivors, it was a defining moment, one that reinforced their respect for the wilderness and the unpredictable creatures that call it home. In the autumn of 1982, a group of hunters ventured into the untamed wilderness of Montana's Bob Marshall Wilderness Complex. The area, known for its dense forests and rugged mountains, was a paradise for those seeking elk and deer. The hunters, Jack, a seasoned outdoorsman, Paul, his lifelong friend, brothers Kyle and Matthew, and a young, eager novice named Derek, planned a week-long expedition that would take them deep into the heart of bear country. The first few days of the hunt were uneventful but rewarding. The group tracked and successfully bagged 2 deer and an elk, their spirits high as they hauled their prizes back to a base camp nestled near a glacial stream. They took care to store the meat securely, hanging it high in trees and away from their tents. The occasional sighting of bear tracks served as a reminder of the risks, but their preparations and experience kept them confident. On the 5th day, the group decided to split up to cover more ground. Jack and Paul headed northwest toward a rocky ridge known for its elk herds, while Kyle, Matthew, and Derek explored a nearby valley. The morning passed in quiet determination, the hunters moving silently through the forest, their eyes scanning for movement among the trees. By midday, Kyle, Matthew, and Derek discovered a fresh trail of elk tracks leading to a clearing surrounded by dense underbrush. The group took positions along the edge, their rifles ready. As they waited, the forest seemed to grow still, the usual sounds of rustling leaves and bird calls fading into an eerie silence. The first sign of danger came with a low growl from the thicket behind them. Kyle turned, his breath catching as a massive grizzly bear emerged from the shadows. The bear's fur was dark and matted, its powerful frame dwarfing the hunters. It sniffed the air, its small, dark eyes locking onto the men. The growl deepened, reverberating through the clearing. The hunters froze, their training kicking in. Kyle raised his rifle, his hands steady but his heart pounding. He fired a warning shot into the air, the crack echoing through the forest. The bear paused, growling louder before charging. Its speed was astonishing, its massive paws tearing through the underbrush as it closed the distance. Kyle fired again, the bullet grazing the bear's shoulder. The animal roared in fury, swiping at Matthew, who had been standing closest. The bear's claws tore through his jacket, leaving deep gashes along his arm and chest. Derek, paralyzed with fear, stumbled backward, his rifle slipping from his grasp. Kyle fired a third shot, hitting the bear's side. The impact slowed it momentarily, but its aggression remained undeterred. It lunged at Derek, knocking him to the ground. Matthew, despite his injuries, grabbed a fallen branch and struck the bear, distracting it long enough for Kyle to take aim again. The bullet struck the bear's chest, causing it to roar and retreat a few paces. The hunters regrouped, their breaths ragged and their faces pale. Matthew's injuries were severe, blood soaking through his torn clothing. Derek, though shaken, was unharmed. Kyle reloaded his rifle, his hands trembling as he scanned the forest for any sign of the bear's return. Meanwhile, Jack and Paul, having heard the gunshots, abandoned their hunt and hurried toward the clearing. They arrived to find the aftermath of the attack. The underbrush trampled, blood staining the ground, and the group visibly shaken. Paul quickly assessed Matthew's injuries, using supplies from his pack to bandage the wounds and slow the bleeding. Jack took point, his rifle at the ready as the group prepared to move. The hunters decided to return to camp, knowing they could not stay in the clearing with the bear still nearby. Matthew, unable to walk, was carried on a makeshift stretcher fashioned from their jackets and rifles. The journey was slow and grueling, the weight of their injured companion testing their endurance. Every snap of a branch or rustle of leaves set their nerves on edge, their eyes darting toward the shadows. As night fell, the group reached a rocky outcrop overlooking the valley. They decided to camp there, believing the elevated position would offer some protection. They built a fire, its flickering light casting long shadows on the surrounding rocks. Jack and Kyle took turns keeping watch, their rifles ready as the others tended to Matthew and tried to rest. In the early hours of the morning, the bear returned. Its growls echoed through the valley, growing louder as it approached the camp. Jack fired a warning shot, but the bear charged, its massive frame crashing through the underbrush. It swiped at the fire, scattering embers and sending sparks into the night sky. Kyle and Paul fired in unison, the bullets striking the bear's chest and shoulder. The animal roared, its movements slowing but its aggression unyielding. It lunged toward the group, its claws raking across the ground. Jack fired again, the shot hitting the bear's head and finally bringing it down. The animal collapsed, its massive body heaving before falling still. The hunters stood in silence, their breaths visible in the cold air. The bear, a formidable force of nature, lay motionless before them. The group's relief was palpable, but tempered by exhaustion and the weight of what they had endured. By dawn, the hunters resumed their trek to base camp. Matthew's condition remained critical, his wounds requiring immediate medical attention. The group moved as quickly as their circumstances allowed, their unity and determination driving them forward. They reached camp by midday, signaling for assistance using a portable radio. A rescue team arrived hours later, airlifting Matthew to a nearby hospital. The rest of the hunters were treated for minor injuries and exhaustion. The bear's body was later examined by wildlife officials, who determined that its aggression was likely driven by hunger and territorial instincts. The incident highlighted the dangers of venturing into bear country and the importance of preparation and respect for wildlife. The hunter's experience left an indelible mark. Jack, though a seasoned outdoorsman, reevaluated his approach to hunting and wilderness safety. Kyle and Matthew, though scarred physically and emotionally, found strength in their bond as brothers. Derek, having faced his fears, gained a new appreciation for the wild and its unpredictable power. The story of the grizzly bear attack in the Bob Marshall Wilderness became a cautionary tale, shared among hunters and outdoor enthusiasts as a testament to resilience and survival. For those who lived through it, the memory of that harrowing encounter served as both a sobering reminder and a profound lesson in the delicate balance between humanity and the untamed wilderness. In the summer of 1967, a group of 8 campers embarked on a wilderness retreat in Colorado's San Juan Mountains. Organized by a local adventure club, the trip was intended to immerse participants in the rugged beauty of the high peaks and provide a break from the demands of daily life. The group consisted of seasoned outdoor enthusiasts and novices alike. Grace, the leader with decades of experience. Robert, a retired park ranger. Siblings Amelia and Daniel, eager for their first backcountry trip. College friends Natalie and Claire, and a married couple, Ethan and Laura, celebrating their anniversary with a challenging hike. The first few days were idyllic. The group traversed steep trails, forded icy streams, and camped beneath towering pines. The peaks loomed above them, their rocky faces streaked with lingering patches of snow. Wildlife sightings added to the magic of the trip, a herd of elk grazing in a meadow, an eagle soaring overhead, and even a black bear seen from a safe distance. Grace ensured that everyone adhered to safety protocols, particularly in bear country. Food was stored in bear-proof containers and hung high in trees, and the campers made noise as they hiked to avoid surprising any predators. On the fourth day, the group reached a remote basin surrounded by jagged peaks. A glacial lake sparkled in the sunlight, its surface reflecting the cloudless sky. They decided to camp near the lake, setting up their tents in a semicircle around a central fire pit. The evening was filled with laughter and camaraderie as they cooked dinner and shared stories under the stars. The tranquility of the setting masked the danger that lurked nearby. In the early hours of the morning, a loud crash shattered the stillness. Robert was the first to wake, his years as a ranger sharpening his instincts. He unzipped his tent and peered into the darkness, his flashlight cutting through the shadows. The beam landed on a massive grizzly bear pawing at one of the food containers. Despite the group's precautions, the bear's keen sense of smell had drawn it to the camp. Robert alerted Grace, who quickly woke the others. The bear, sensing movement, growled and turned its attention to the tents. Its sheer size and presence were terrifying, its eyes glinting in the light of the campers' flashlights. Grace grabbed her bear spray and signaled for everyone to stay calm and stick together. The bear, undeterred, advanced, its growls growing louder. The first charge was swift. The bear lunged at the food container, flipping it over and scattering its contents. Grace fired a burst of bear spray, the orange mist enveloping the animal's face. The bear roared, shaking its head and retreating momentarily. The campers used the opportunity to gather on higher ground, forming a defensive line with their bear spray canisters ready. The bear's retreat was short-lived. It circled the camp, growling and swiping at tents and gear. Ethan and Laura, caught on the far side of the camp, scrambled to join the others. The bear charged again, swiping at Ethan and knocking him to the ground. Laura screamed as she tried to pull him away, but the bear's claws raked his leg, leaving deep gashes. Grace and Robert acted quickly, firing bursts of spray to drive the bear back. The group retreated further up the slope, their breaths ragged and their fear palpable. Amelia and Daniel helped Ethan, whose injuries made it difficult to walk. Natalie and Claire, though shaken, kept their focus, scanning the forest for any sign of the bear's return. Grace took stock of their supplies, grimly noting that much of their food and gear had been destroyed. As dawn broke, the group devised a plan. They needed to reach a ranger station marked on their map, a grueling 10-mile hike through challenging terrain. With Ethan unable to walk unaided, they fashioned a makeshift stretcher using tent poles and jackets. Grace and Robert took turns carrying him, while the others kept watch and helped navigate. The journey was arduous. The group moved cautiously, every sound in the forest setting their nerves on edge. The bear's occasional growls echoed in the distance, a chilling reminder of the danger that still lingered. Amelia, though inexperienced, proved resourceful, using her first aid knowledge to keep Ethan stable. Daniel, motivated by his sister's determination, took the lead in scouting the trail. Midway through the hike, the bear reappeared. Its massive frame emerged from the underbrush, its dark eyes fixed on the group. The campers froze, their bear spray canisters ready. The bear growled, advancing slowly. Grace, her voice steady, signaled for the group to hold their ground. She fired another burst of spray, hitting the bear's face. The animal roared in frustration, swiping at the air before retreating into the trees. The group pressed on, their adrenaline pushing them forward, despite their exhaustion. By late afternoon, they reached a rocky ridge overlooking the valley. The ranger station was visible in the distance, a small wooden structure nestled among the trees. The sight renewed their spirits, and they quickened their pace. As they approached the station, the bear made one final appearance. It charged from the underbrush, its growls reverberating through the valley. The group formed a defensive line, using noise and bear spray to deter the animal. Robert fired a flare from an emergency kit, the bright light startling the bear. It hesitated, growling one last time before retreating into the forest for good. The campers reached the ranger station just as dusk settled over the mountains. The rangers acted swiftly, providing medical attention to Ethan and calming the group. A rescue team was dispatched to recover what remained of their gear and assess the bear's behavior. Wildlife officials later determined that the bear's aggression was likely due to hunger and environmental stress, a stark reminder of the challenges facing wildlife in changing habitats. Ethan underwent surgery for his injuries and made a full recovery. The others, though shaken, emerged physically unscathed, but forever changed. Grace continued leading trips, her commitment to wilderness education stronger than ever. Robert returned to his work as a conservation advocate, using the experience to raise awareness about human-wildlife coexistence. Amelia and Daniel became avid hikers, their bond strengthened by the ordeal. Natalie and Claire, despite their fear, found solace in their shared resilience. The story of the bear attack in the San Juan Mountains became a cautionary tale, shared among outdoor enthusiasts as both a warning and a testament to survival. For the group, it was a defining moment, a harrowing yet profound chapter in their lives that underscored the raw power of nature and the strength of the human spirit.